Twitchell's Book 1, Dwindling Magic. Written and read by T.D.L. White. Chapter 19. Week 2. The trick to finding the alchemist was being willing and able to participate in very bad things. This was precisely why, until the conversation over ice creams on Sunday, Nick had no intention of going anywhere near the alchemist's darknet site. The sort of jobs that Nick took were all to do with poking around in the security of corporate websites and internet-connected systems. The alchemist was less interested in the discovery of backdoors in database servers and more interested in simply stealing all of the data. While Nick wasn't an elite hacker, not the sort that worked for the alchemist, he did have one thing going for him. By being a member of the Proxy Hunters chat server, the Z Forum, he knew he was brushing up against some other users who straddled both worlds. He had spent all of Sunday thinking about how he might be able to open a channel of communication with someone who could, in turn, get a message to the alchemist. And all the while, he wondered how much trouble he could get into. If he found the alchemist and sent a message to the right address, there was no guarantee that he would ever get a reply. And even if he did get a reply, that still didn't mean it would be in any way useful in curing James's condition. Despite all this, he'd come up with some ideas, and figured that the worst that could happen would be that he got banned from the Z Forum and cut out of the proxy hunting game, which would mean that he'd have to find another way to make money. And he could still go looking for exploits on his own without being nudged in the right direction by a stack kernel. All in all, it seemed like a risk worth taking to help his new friends. Plus, it was something that they had no chance of doing themselves. Sure, they could conjure magic portals and had mercenary rats to fight for them, but that didn't get you into a darknet forum. Nick might not have a magic key, but he had a laptop and he knew how to use it. Even then, he'd had to sleep on the idea before making his decision. Which is why he found himself sitting at Elf's dining table early on a Monday morning, outlining his plan to the others. "You think it'll work?" Jenny asked, after he'd given them the gist. He nodded. "I can't guarantee it, but it's got a chance of getting us closer to the alchemist. Right now, I don't have the right access." "And you can trade your latest vulnerability for better access without getting ripped off," James said. "I mean, how can you trust anyone in the Z Forum?" "It's a good vulnerability that no one else has found. I got lucky. I was running an out-of-date scanner which had a whole load of old signatures loaded. I doubt anyone else would be searching for a 10-year-old vulnerability like I was. And I don't need to trust whoever I trade with. If they don't get me what I want, I'll just make the vulnerability public, and they get nothing." "All this, just to get access to another chat server?" Elf rolled her eyes. "And what then?" "Not just another chat server. The low-core request server, the LCRS, run by the alchemist and used by hackers and criminals across the world. If I get in, I'll be able to see what jobs he's willing to pay for. And if there's something he wants that we can provide, then we'll be in a position to bargain." "You think you can hack a system for the alchemist?" James raised his eyebrows. "I thought you were just a script kiddie." "I am, and there's no way that I can do any of the hacking that the alchemist is willing to pay for. It's nation-state level stuff." "So what's the point in getting into the chat server to look at his wish list if you can't do anything on it?" James frowned. Then his face softened. Unless there's something that the alchemist wants that we can get him using magic. I won't be able to complete a job, but we might be able to." Nick looked at the others. "That's what I'm hoping for. But I won't know unless I can get in to have a look." He had been expecting some pushback against the idea of using magic to help with whatever the alchemist might need. When no one objected, he carried on. "In that case, I'll see where I can get. It might take a while to get access, and then it might be longer before a suitable job comes up. "It's better than we could do ourselves," Jenny said. "Thanks for doing this." "Time to leave," James said, glancing out of the trifold doors into the wind and rain swept garden. "And if the weather's like this at Twitchell's, prepare for a bumpy ride." He opened a portal into the forest. To Nick's relief, it wasn't quite as wet on the other side of the portal, which was only about 15 feet from the ground. They floated down between two huge tree trunks that creaked and groaned in the wind. Cece ran off to collect Jenny, Elf and Nick's badges. James had his with him, wrapped back up in foil. He unwrapped it as they walked through the forest to the school building. And that was the start of Nick's second week at Twitchell's, floating through a magical portal and having his ID badge brought to him by a monkey disguised as a dog. Once inside the house, he went to his dorm room and found that his pond-soaked clothes had been returned, clean and fresh, in a white plastic laundry bag. He changed into them, gathered up all of his first week's dirty clothes, and left them outside the door in the same bag. James showed him what to do, and did the same. No point doing your own washing when Twitchell's will do it for you. The next few days went by in a similar fashion. Lessons which were hard, prep which was long, but helped him catch up, and evenings which were spent in Brighton working on finding a way into the Alchemist's chat server. The only variables were which subjects he was catching up with and what delicious food was served from Twitchell's dining hall. Thankfully, Collier and his crew seemed to have lost interest in picking on Nick. James still wanted to confront the man-boy, but Jenny persuaded him that keeping a low profile was good for everyone. By Friday, Nick had made little progress toward getting into LCRS, the low-core request server where the alchemist might be found. He sent a lot of messages to other proxy hunters, trying to figure out who might be into darker stuff than looking for easy vulnerabilities. His angle was straightforward. He needed money, which was true, and he wanted to level up to get it, which wasn't true, but it made sense. He'd got as far as sending 2 tentative requests to other Z-Forum users offering a trade, but not exposing exactly what his vulnerability was, only hinting that it was worthwhile. One of the requests hit a dead end. The user didn't have the access that Nick was asking for. The other user hadn't replied. And that was it. He might be getting nowhere, or somewhere. It was hard to tell. He'd filled the others in on what he'd done, and they seemed happy enough. They were preoccupied with the auction. They were fairly certain that they'd found the right one, and fairly uncertain how they could use that information to steal the book back. During Friday lunchtime, the gang met up in the dining hall. Nick, James and Elf had chosen pizza, while Jenny had gone for leek and potato soup. "The inspector's around," James said. "I had a meeting with him after break." Nick had completely forgotten about the Friday meetings. "How was it last week?" Jenny asked him. "I mean, the inspector let you stay on here, so it must have been okay." "It was fine. He didn't ask anything about you, or Brighton or anything. We mostly just played chess." "He does that with me sometimes," Jenny said. "I think he does it when he hasn't got anything to say." "No," James said, waggling a pizza crust at Jenny. "He uses it to teach us stuff. I don't always get what he's on about, but I think he's trying to improve our problem-solving skills." "He never plays against me," Elf said. "Maybe he's scared that you'll beat him," Jenny said. "I don't think so. The last time I played was against Cece, and I didn't win. We both got bored and agreed a draw." "I'm rubbish at chess," Nick said. "He showed me a trick opening and talked about looking for checks and skewers and things. If I really wanted to win at chess, I'd just use an AI bot. They're better than humans." "Yeah, but you don't always have an AI bot with you," James said. "I've got a chess set back at Elf's. I'll dig it out. Might be fun to play a bit." Getting beaten more than once a week didn't sound like fun, but James sounded keen, so Nick nodded. Nick got the call for a meeting with the inspector halfway through art. He didn't mind, as it gave him a break from an awful watercolour scene that wasn't much more than a washed-out rainbow puddle soaking into his sketchbook. In the library, the inspector had the chessboard set up and ready to play. After a brief check on Nick's academic progress, they started a game. Nick was white and went first. He still didn't have any idea what to do, so pushed a pawn on the edge of the board 2 squares forwards. The inspector moved a knight, then Nick nudged the same pawn another square forward into black's half of the board. "Ah," the inspector said, nodding. "Genius pawn, or fool's pawn. Same opening, 2 different names." "Is it good?" Nick wasn't sure how one opening could be genius and foolish at the same time. "That depends on who is playing it, and why. It's not the worst possible first move, but it's close." "So why would a genius play it, if it's so bad?" The inspector considered the board for a moment. "At the highest level of the game, the best players have learned pretty much every opening and how to respond. Some of them have favourite lines, sequences of moves, that they've studied for years and know how to use to squeeze out an advantage. So one way to try and level things is to break the opening. Play something outlandish that no one would have a learned response to. Your first move, h4, is weak. No great player is going to devote years to a weaker opening when there are better alternatives." "What's the best opening?" "Well, there's no best, but there are a few classic openings that have been used by great players. Let's start again, and I'll talk you through one of them, called the Sicilian. Then, once you've mastered that, and some others, you can return to Fool's Pawn to see how to exploit it." Like the previous Friday, James took Jenny and Elf back to Brighton, then came back to eat dinner and fetch Nick. This time, though, he didn't have to leave his badge in a tree. He just wrapped it in foil. Over dinner, Nick talked to James about the Fool's Pawn opening and about learning the Sicilian. "Sicilian?" James looked impressed. "I use the King's Indian, or variations of it at least. I'll show you it when we get back." Back in Brighton, they settled into a familiar routine. Nick at the table, laptop out. James making notes about the portals. Jenny putting the kettle on to make tea, and Elf pouring herself a large glass of wine. She brought it over to the table and sat down with a sigh. Cece jumped onto the table and put a small black hand on the girl's arm. "We're wasting time," she said. "Are we any closer to anything?" "Nick's French is improving," James said, "and he's learning the Sicilian opening. Is that chess set around somewhere?" "Twitchell's is dull," Elf ignored him, "and my parents are still out there somewhere. I want to do something, go somewhere. Anything's better than hanging around with rich idiots." "You chose to go out with one of them," James said, getting up and rummaging around in a sideboard. "The rest of us avoid them when we can. Isn't there another boy that you've got your eye on?" "That was just because I was bored, and just my luck that Collier was boring." "Boring is safe," Jenny said, joining them with a teapot and 3 mugs. "None of us have nearly died in the last few months." Nick's pond diving experience wasn't even close to what the others had been through. "I'm still dying, remember," James said. "Or at least, I am if the magic fails completely. If it wasn't for the key to the air, I'd be stuck in Brighton the whole time. Here it is." He pulled out a black bag and held it up. It rattled and clinked. "May as well set this up. No harm in playing a few games while we work out what to do next." The black bag contained both a set of plastic chess pieces and a folded-up silicon board that they smoothed out onto the table. The pieces must have had weights in them, as they were heavier than they looked. James was white, and it didn't take Nick long to figure out he was good. Very good. He knew his opening, the King's Indian, really well, and regardless of what move Nick made, he had a counter-move ready. James didn't even have to think at all until they were about 10 moves in. After Nick had been beaten comprehensively, James asked him to set up the Sicilian opening. Nick did the best he could from memory, but ended up looking at a video online which explained it. While it was playing, he checked the Z forum for any new messages. "Bingo," he said. The others all looked round. "What?" James said. "We're in." Nick tapped the top of the laptop screen. "I've got an invite into the Alchemist server. Another proxy hunter traded it for my vulnerability. They actually gave me their personal LCRS invite. They said there was no way I'm going to get into that shady biz, too risky IRL, and wished me luck. They didn't want access because they're worried about risks in real life, James asked. It's what I said before, way worse than proxy hunting. You sure you should use it? Jenny sounded concerned. I've got a load of protection running on this thing. Nick was typing as he spoke. He finished writing a connection script and saved it. Should be fine just to take a look at the server and see what's on it. Then we can decide. Okay, Jenny said. Just take a look, but if anything happens that might put you in danger, just get out. Nick nodded. He checked the VPN he was using to make sure it was active, and double-checked he was running through an anonymous proxy. All right, he ran the connection script. Let's see what the alchemist is willing to pay for. This podcast was brought to you by me, TDL White. I'll be reading a chapter a week until it's complete.